It's all well and good when we discuss the things that we're supposed to do as parents, and Harold didn't mention that we have two, and they're just about at the point of truly leaving home. And it's actually very hard. It is hard. And you're at the point where you have many, many years where your children are at home with you, and that is also hard, but also, as every speaker described, joyous. Little problem gets in the way of some of the joy, and that's that sense of how do you end up staying in charge of your kids. So I could not see this on the screen that we were watching some of the talks before on. I need to know the ages of the kids who are represented here. I'm sorry if you had to do this before, but from 0 to 5, raise your hands. Whoa, big group. From 6 to 10, raise your hands. Just as big a group. From 10 to 13, raise your hands. Not so big, but a substantial group. Anyone over 13? Even more. How many children do each of you have? This is just astonishing. That's a lot of kids at different ages. So whatever it is that we will learn right now, you'll be able to use at the different ages, because the principles of staying in charge basically are the same throughout all of the years, except that the problems are very different. So let me just give you a bit of a context. And I want you to try to hang in here for just a few more minutes this afternoon to get this context, and then I'll give you the how-tos. What will get in the way of you being able to stay in charge, and what you can do about it. All right, so here's the context. We've had a couple of generations of child-rearing advice. You're now hearing, whether you realized it or not, the Y put on a program today of 21st century child-rearing advice. We could have gone back, or they could have gone back and told you a lot of what came before, but it wouldn't really match your children. We wouldn't have been talking about the brain. We wouldn't have been talking about technology. We wouldn't have been talking about the different states of anxiety that Harold was describing. We wouldn't be talking about the importance that Ned was trying to describe in terms of connection. This is part of being a 21st century clinician and parent and educator. What happened was we had the greatest generation. A lot of your grandparents, your kids' grandparents, they were of that era. You know what they're like. These are your elder people who went through the Second World War, the Great Depression, right? They're different. They have different sensibilities. They believe in things called privacy. They believe in top-down hierarchy. They believe that children should be seen, or at least they used to believe that children should be seen and not heard. They actually know that phrase because I said so. They didn't talk about negotiating, going back and forth, and they had a sense of certitude. Remember that word, certitude. They believed, whether right or wrong, they believed what they said was actually right. They didn't need science to tell them. This was just right. So along come the baby boomers, and they rebel against everything their greatest generation parents had been describing. They rebel with drugs, sex, rock and roll, the generation gap, friction. But the thing that is really astonishing is that group also believed that what they felt and what they said was absolutely correct. It was like this vertical struggle. Greatest generation, baby boomers. And the entire complex of advice that you got, or that parents got, was how to help with that conflict, how to help enmeshed families try to separate, how to help kids individuate and grow. It was about separating. Well, somewhere I began to notice in the early 90s that the kids we were seeing, and our kids, one was born in 1986 and the other in 1991, their friends and the kids I was seeing in the agency that I run, and we see an enormous number of clients there, mostly young adults, but that whoever it was that I was talking to, people were reporting something very different. We had a different parent-child dyad. And I started to write about it in the early 90s, first in Parenting by Heart, then in a number of articles, then in about 7 other books, the latest of which is out there called Childhood Unbound. Because in that book, I realized what was going on, what was changing. What was changing was that starting in about 1980 or 1982, we started to have the first group of children born to parents who were not either greatest generation or baby boomer people. They had a very different sensibility. These parents and their children are what I call post-boomers. Many of you are digital natives. You're not immigrants to the world of technology. You grew up with it. It's changed a lot. It changes every minute, it seems. Many of you don't really believe in privacy in the same way that other generations did. Most of us, and I include myself in this group, would feel that we should negotiate with our children. We want our kids to speak their minds. We don't want them to disappear. We want them to learn to express themselves. The notion of suppressing our children scares us, and we don't believe in it. And here's the thing that we all share. And I can tell you, I share this, and I tell this to my students. I tell this to my own children. I tell our child, she's leaving and to go to medical school. And it's hard. It's hard for us. It's the first separation in a way that I think in 3 generations we've had in our family. And we were having dinner, she and I, and this was just a few days ago. And here I am talking on the stage, and I said, you know, Leah, you're just going to have patience with Mommy and me. We're not used to doing this. We're just going to fumble along because we don't know how to do this kind of separation. And she took my hand and she said, that's all right, Daddy. It'll be different, but you'll be okay. Now, she is a smart kid. But you know what? All our kids, they feel this. They know that we are basically stumbling, fumbling along. And the thing that is very powerful that comes out from a day like today is that post-boomers, this group of parents and children, especially parents, don't have the certitude that previous generations did. You wouldn't be here today if you really felt so certain about what you were doing. You just don't have that sense of true authoritative, Harold mentioned the word authoritative, it's in the subtitle of Childhood Unbound, authoritative parenting, because it's hard to do that when there's so much advice going on. And it's hard to stay in charge of our children when they are so articulate, so precocious, when we are afraid and don't really believe many times in the notion of being authoritative because it feels authoritarian. All right. So when you go home and you start to try to put into play some of the things that were described today, I want to predict some of the ways that you're going to have a little bit of trouble so that you can maybe prevail. Number one, the first thing is you need to ask yourself, and I'd like to see a show of hands, ask yourselves, do you actually believe? Do you really believe in the notion that real authority and rules actually help children? Raise your hands. Now, see how many people have raised their hands. To all those who can't see, almost everyone here believes in it. But let me ask you something. How many of you have some, at least some, trouble with it with your children? You can be honest. Almost everybody here. Part of it is that deep down in your gut, you're still not sure whether you want to go back to days where children should be seen and not heard, where you want to do the thing that maybe you experienced from your own parents, and the sensibility that we should be in charge in some way rubs us slightly wrong. Well, all of the research, the longitudinal research, which we now have 30 years worth of data to tell us, because we also, my wife and I, were scared. Well, are we hurting our children's development? Are we making them more anxious? It's true that if we were only, which we're not capable of, authoritarian, they would be hurt. But sometimes we had trouble even creating consequences that we could stick with because we didn't quite believe in it. So I'm here to say to you that the research shows, it's not my opinion. Joanne mentioned this in her talk. It's not opinion. This is basically what we now know. We now know that rules, that consequences, that hierarchy in the home actually help our children to thrive. We know that they solve problems better in life later on. We know that they have fewer interpersonal issues. We know that certain things, which I'll talk about, will help them stay away from drugs longer, start sex later. We know these things because we've been following kids as they've gotten older. So as much as you want to have these rules, your children will not believe it unless you feel it in your core, unless you begin to believe, my God, this really matters. And one example, I did a survey with about 250 kids over many years, from 3 or 4 all the way up to 16. And I asked them, what matters to you most that your parents or your teachers do? We have good acoustics in here. Someone raise your hand. What do you think they said was the most important thing for them? Someone? Go ahead, loud. Listening. Anything else? Yes. Set limits. One more, loud. Protect them. You know what they said? They want, above all else, our undivided attention. I said, what? Undivided attention? A 4-year-old says this to me. And it really gets to me. What do you mean undivided attention? Your sibling's not around? Your friend's not there? She said, no, that mommy isn't doing 50 other things at once. They can feel and hear us. They can sense us multitasking. What Catherine was talking about. Actually, also what Joanne brought up. And 4-year-olds can tell when it is that we are actually listening. But the number 2 thing they said was put beautifully by a 10-year-old girl who said, we need, don't tell our parents, we need rules. And she then said this phrase I'll never forget, when there are no rules in my house, there's chaos. And that chaos that comes from people, the human condition of needing some certainty, is part of what our children need. So number 1, you need to work with your mindset. You need to really explore some of the literature that's out there, the books that you're seeing, and try to understand that it really makes our kids actually even more creative if we are able to be there for them in a hierarchical way in which we create some kind of limits. The kids are saying it themselves. Now, why is this? Harold mentioned the container. This is something that I've worked, and Catherine mentions it in her book as well. For years I've said, what we need to do is to create families at home that feel, watch my hands when I say this, that feel like they're containers around our children. I called it the empathic envelope, an envelope of values, of beliefs, of who you are. Again, the end of what Harold was saying. But empathic. In other words, that we understand who our children, how each of them is different, who they are. I wrote an article, one of the better ones that I've written, called Discovering Our Children. Because when we had our second child, it was like we had to learn to parent all over again. And what is the single key thing that's different? It is that each of our children has a different temperament. And my advice to you, if you want to learn a little bit more, is to get more deeply into what kind of temperament does your child have. You can do this rather easily. You can do what I call, go home and do a tempogram, meaning do your parents, your line, your brothers, your sisters, and then your children, and see what kind of temperamental constellations they have in common. You're going to find certain temperaments that run in your family. They've been given other names, colloquial names, but temperament in a certain way is Freud used to say anatomy was destiny. Temperament is destiny almost. And each of our children has a different temperament. One of ours is very outgoing, the other one is much more shy. A lot of this is hardwired. Not that it's not changeable, but there's a genetic loading for it. Some of your children work great and are terrific during transitions. Another child is going to be unbelievably anxious or upset during transitions. Some of your children are active literally, and they don't have ADHD, they don't have anything diagnosable, but they're active, and they've been that way since being in utero. You could feel it when they were inside you. Well, another one is that some of our children are tenacious. When they see their goal, when they get their eye on something, you basically can't get their eye off of it. It is the temperamental constellation that we need to recognize. And part of how you recognize it is number 3, is by beginning to learn and know what your dances are in your family, what your interactions, your repetitive interactions are. Everything we talked about today, everything that was brought up, they all manifest themselves in dances that we have with our children, repetitive interactions. You know what they are. You go from 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. Your child knows what's coming. They know exactly where you're going. From 3 and 4 on up, children can predict what it is we're about to say or do. You ask a child, well, what's mom going to say about, you're having something to eat just before dinner, and not only will, of course, he or she be able to predict it, but she'll predict our tone, what exactly we're going to say, and when it comes to consequences, whether we mean it or not. These dances are the thing that people come to me about when Harold mentioned, oh, well, he's an esteemed clinician. What people come to me about is basically what I'm talking about here today with you. One of the major things is to help figure out what your dance is. And basically for whatever the price of admission was today, for the why, I'm going to give you the way that I tell people to work on it at home. You need to know your dance at least as well as your 4-year-old. So the way to do that is to do some stories from home. At night, before you go to bed, just simply write a couple of dialogues. He said, I said. He said, I said. He said, I said. Done. Between you and your child. Between you and your child. Do another one. She said, I said. She said, I said. She said, I said. Do 3 or 4 of these over the next week. And I guarantee you, you can email me if it turns out not to be the case. I guarantee you that you are going to see a repetitive dance, a response that you give to your child almost every single time. You'll find out whether you are the organizer, the reminder, the nagger, whether you constantly look on the better side of things with your children, what your trigger points are. Now, we spent a lot of time focusing on our kids. What are our trigger points? What are yours? We need to know what those points are in order for us to be able to dance. This is your child here. Just look at the hand, as they say. And here are we dancing around our children, trying the best we can, trying to give them what it is they need. And these interactions, these repetitive interactions, when our kids can keep pushing certain buttons in us, and they do it very well, those become part of their personality. That's how personality gets shaped. And part of the power of learning what your dance is being able to figure out ways that maybe you can respond just a little bit differently. That seems simple, but it's really hard. And I'm going to ask you, try to do it during this week. Try to ask yourself to remember to write these stories down. Okay, when you find your trigger points, we essentially then in some way erupt. Now, as Harold said, anxiety begins before we're aware of it. But you know what? You can become, by becoming slightly more mindful, which is obviously a big word these days in our culture, you can become aware of the beginnings of it, the early warning signals in your body. And I think what I'd love you to do is very quickly think for just a second, where in your body do you begin to feel it at its earliest, when you wanted to, just whoever would like to in this small, intimate group, share a little bit. Where do you feel it? Yes, say it loud and I'll repeat it. Teeth and jaw is a big one. Thank God my daughter's marrying a dentist. Where else? Any other hands? Go ahead, loud to everyone. In your throat? What happens in your throat? It tightens up. It begins to happen. One more from somewhere else. Where else do you feel it? Go ahead, to everyone. Shoulders. In your shoulders. Somewhere in you, this early warning system is there. Hard to see at first, but not so hard when you start to identify the dance. Find it, and you will begin to then do something to, in a mindful way, calm yourself down. All right, staying in charge in some way means not going from 0 to 60 every single day. And it's hard, especially morning time, right? There are so many ways to begin to flip out in the morning. So I stood outside a school here in the area, a public school, and I asked everyone, what do you do to calm down? What do you do as a parent to calm down? And I got all these different responses. And I always ask every single audience that I speak to, every group of parents, what do you do that helps you to calm down? Say it in 2 or 3 words. And please help each other. You are a community of learners. Do I see a hand? I can't tell. Is that a hand or? Yes, right there. Go ahead. Walk out, leave the room. How old is your child? 9 and 6. Anyone care to do this with a 4-year-old? You know what your 4-year-old will do. Exactly what ours did. They'll follow you. No matter where you go. We went to our bedroom, we closed the door, and we were going to be very strong about it. I learned about this many years ago when our daughter was 4. We closed the door, and you know, in our house there is a space between the door and the floor. So she knew what to do. She knew exactly what buttons to push. We closed the door, we tried to calm ourselves down, and through that little space under the door, you could see her cute little kitten paws start to come through, begging, please, Mommy, Daddy, open the door. And we held firm. 2 seconds later, 3 seconds when we opened the door, she then said, was something upsetting you? And in fact, that's what your calming yourself down does. It breaks the runaway action that's going on in your body and in your brain. It helps create punctuation for our kids, because childhood is basically one long run-on sentence. It really is. So what do you do? 2 minutes on what you do to calm yourself down. Can I see a hand for that? Yes, loud.
Take a deep breath.
You take a deep breath. In one of the places that I go to, this mom was getting out of, her voice was rising, her throat was, getting tighter, her shoulders were beginning to scrunch up, and her daughter, out of nowhere, said to her, Mommy, breathe. 5 years old. Next year, she learned to write. She wrote a little card, put it on the refrigerator door, in which she wrote, Mommy, remember to breathe. I went back every year to this school, and every year, What had at first been some sort of simple, almost stupid thing that we never thought of had now been proven by the research, by the whole mindfulness movement, by all of what it is that we're learning about mind-body, that breathing is actually important. You could save a lot of friction, a lot of inner turmoil if you did remember that. What else do you do that helps you to calm down? Yes, loud. You count to 10. And 10 will do it for you? It's enough?
Very slowly.
Very slowly. She counts very slowly to 10. All right. What you should do when you go back to your schools is you can do a monkey survey in which you ask, if you can get administration to go along to do this, ask them to ask the parent body to share with each other what they do to try to calm down. Because you need to learn ways to do it. And that will help if you start to share it within your community back at home through your school. It's one of the most helpful things. And they then put it out online. These are what our parents do to help themselves calm down. Okay, the next thing is that when you get really upset and you're trying to be in charge, you create consequences, right? You start to come up with things that you believe are going to help teach your child. First of all, what do you think is critical about a consequence? What do you think matters? That it be what? Realistic. What else? Quickly. Immediate. Realistic. Immediate. Yes. Enforceable. Yes. Huh? What did she say? Commensurate?
It can't be too harsh. It has balance.
Okay. Commensurate. Is that what it means? Commensurate means it can't be too harsh. It has to be balanced. One other. What else? Commensurate, immediate. Yes, we have two here. Did you come together? Yes. Okay. Let's see if it's the same one. It should be related. Were you going to say that? Almost the same thing. Did you just make that up because your wife said that, or? No, you really mean it. You actually mean it. All right. Basically, what we now know is that it needs to be enforceable. Yeah, it's nice that if it is commensurate, immediate, it's nice that it is relevant, but it just needs to be something that you can do. So a lot of the times, that's the problem. You know, a lot of what we do in parenting is just counterintuitive. It's just part of what life is about. There is an incredible saying, which I'm going to repeat. It's not a saying, it's a quote, which is that out of the crooked timber of humanity, nothing straight was ever made. What that means essentially is a lot of different things. Kant first used that, sometimes not well. Isaiah Berlin used it in some of his writing. But essentially it means that some of what we need to do is counterintuitive. So sometimes you need to be inconsistent. In other words, you need to change your mind after you create a consequence because you realize that there's no way in this world you are going to be able to enforce it because it came out in the middle of being really, really angry. Now, you've all visited other people's houses, right? You've seen them lose their tempers. You could just talk about them for 1 minute. What have been some things that you have threatened with your kids that the second you said it, you knew were going to be impossible to enforce? Your sister told her son no. Did you say no? Did you say no weed? You meant no we. No we for the whole summer. Right. What else? That was your sister, of course, right? Yes? All right. Go ahead. Right there. No vacations. Yes. No, all birthday parties. Carte blanche, yes.
All the time they say, if you don't behave, we're going to go home.
If you don't behave, we're going to go home. She was in Paris when she said this. And they didn't, for some reason, they don't take us seriously. In another place, someone said, I'm going to talk about I'm going to take your Xbox, I'm going to melt it, and take the melted material and turn it into jewelry for Christmas presents. Which really sounded amazing, and everyone thought, ooh, wow, that sounds great. Basically, so what you need to do is counterintuitive. If you are able to realize right afterwards, or sometime later, that this does not make sense, I'd like you to be able to say to your child with conviction, you know what? I thought about it, and I was upset. I was angry. Something was bothering me from school, from work, with a friend, or it's just something I can't enforce, the truth. And tell them this is what we're going to do instead. And you get trapped in the myth of consistency. You are not going to create greater impulsivity or a lack of thoughtfulness. If anything, you will model to them thoughtfulness is something that adults do and that children can learn to do. And then I want you to ask them when they're calm, when their amygdalas have calmed down, when the brain imaging that Joanne might be talking about shows that things are settled. I'd like you to go back to them later on that night. And please remember this, because there is also a lot of research that Myrna Shore started many years ago in her work on raising a thinking child. I'd like you to do the following. Go back when you're both calmer, and I emphasize both, and tell your child why you got upset that day, why you threatened to go, no vacations, no play dates, no birthdays, why you did that. In one quick sentence. Don't get into a long explanation. Your kids tune out. It is unbelievable how he continued talking. I sometimes talk to my kid. I remember he would start to literally slip down from his chair into a coma, practically. And we're both still talking, with no response. A code, we had to start doing a code to help revive him. And we're still going along about why he should have done blah, blah, blah. And that's basically what you're going to do too. We all do. So you need to be able to stop and to ask the following question. And if you need to write this down, write it down. How can we do it differently next time? The dialogue that Harold mentioned at the end, what Ned was referring to in terms of relationship, that is basically, that question spurs that on. You give your opinion, they'll give their opinion. I remember the first time we tried this was when our child was 4 years old. And some of the times they come up with good things. The content doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. It's the process of getting them to think. Harold said walking down the street or talking about things that make you happy, things, or maybe it was Joanne, I don't know, people are melding a little bit in my mind here, that you start to do it and the behavior starts to become part of who you are. So the thinking becomes part of who our children are and they become more in charge of themselves. And there's a lot of research to show it. It's not the be-all and the end-all, but it basically helps. So with our 4-year-old, we asked him, you've all had this, a disastrous play date. Two boys were fighting over everything. It was one of those play dates that's going to make or break a friendship. You know these stories. You live them. It could have happened this week. And we said to him, Sammy, how, if we went through, because we had to stop the play date, how could we do it differently next time? And I thought that this is utter crap as I was saying it. How could you get an answer from a 4-year-old? And yet he thought about it, didn't say anything. He came back later and he said, you know what? That toy, put that toy in the closet next time Jimmy comes over, because I can't share that toy yet. So we did. One more play date. No fighting. Halfway through the play date, he takes that toy out of the closet and starts to share. Now, will this happen all the time with you? No. Did it happen all the time with us when we would ask? Absolutely not. But it started, and it starts to get the thinking process going. And I'm asking you to think about doing that this year, and perhaps this week. All right, number 5, or 6 or 7, I'm not even sure what we're up to. Basically, one of the reasons that you have a hard time following up and following through is because almost all of us are held hostage. I want you to hear this, held hostage to some fear we have of what's going to happen if we really stand firm to a limit. No matter how much I tell you that it's important for them to feel a container around them, an empathic envelope, something in most of us holds us hostage. You know, you're afraid that if you say no play date, maybe your child is going to end up being unpopular and isn't going to be asked to other play dates. You get afraid that if you really come down on something that you think they need, like regular bedtimes, they're going to stop talking to you just during bedtime, which, by the way, happens to be the favorite time for kids to talk, which is kind of like what I always feel. Just when you think you're out at night, they pull you right back in, because that's when they want to talk. 80% of kids I interviewed said that was their favorite time to talk. So maybe you're afraid that that will happen. Maybe if you see a bad grade, or you get a number of, this was the week where acceptances came out, that you get some acceptances that don't go your way. You envision a lifetime of someone else in your family and the troubles they had, or perhaps the troubles you had. And that's what I'd like you to ask yourself. When you find yourself in some way being held hostage, I want you to ask yourself the following question. It's critical to establishing your authority around the house in a compassionate way. Ask yourself, who or what relationship does this remind me of? Who in my family, what relationship in my family does this remind me of? And I'll tell you, asking what relationship is important because we don't just remember or internalize people, we internalize relationships. Who does this remind me of? And I can guarantee you that that fear that you have is going to take you back to somebody in your life. Take you back to a person or a relationship that you are afraid your child is going to evolve or turn into. You need to literally, you can't negotiate with yourself or with your child as when you are a hostage to your own fears. Identify what some of those are, and then what you need to do is to start doing what we call self-talk, or talk with someone else, or get some reality. Is this really going to happen? Is this something that I am destined to do? Again, a lot of the people who spoke before correctly point out to genetic and physiological components to how we all grow. So some of this is going to be based in what you believe is genetically predetermined. But we now know that work, intervention, thinking about something from a very early age on, you're just at the right ages to be coming here for your children, can make a difference and make you feel less scared and less held hostage. The next one is quite often when we lose our position with our children, it is because, and someone give me a time check. I forgot to bring my watch out here. What time is it now? Okay. Sometimes what we have trouble with is, is that we are afraid to be honest with our children. We don't want to hurt them. Sometimes that's the right thing to do. Some of our children are more sensitive than the other. But our children go out to what I call the second family of the peer group, of the pop culture. They go out into that harsh, cruel, but also astonishingly honest world because they need honest feedback. We try so hard to praise. At the very beginning of the day, in the introduction, when Dana was talking before Catherine presented and was interviewed by her, she talked about inauthentic praise. I once wrote an article, and it might have been for Parents Magazine, I'm not sure which of the magazines, in which I talked about the fact that our kids were hooked on praise. They'd become praise junkies. We now know from the research that inauthentic praise, actually, again, it's counterintuitive, that praise, if it's inauthentic, makes our children want to do less. It makes them less resilient. That's part of what Harold was saying too, about resilience. Inauthentic praise, and I believe it's a question of trust. And there is nothing that I feel is more important in becoming an authoritative parent than in your children trusting in your word. So here's a couple of hints that I go into in Childhood Unbound more fully, which I do everything that we're talking about right now. Some things that will make a difference in terms of praise. Praise, actually, this was mentioned earlier, praise the effort, not the product. Don't start looking for something in the thing that you have to like. I remember watching a mom try to do that. Oh, that's a beautiful picture. And her daughter says, nah, it really isn't. Oh, yeah, look at those great clouds. I love the color. She said, there's no color, it's just white. No, really, look at the way that the hue, the way it looked. And the girl said, that's my fingerprint. And she kept going because this daughter knew that she hadn't tried very hard. So praise the effort, and here's a key thing. Praise your children, and I say this at every single talk I give because it's so effective and important. Praise your children when they try to do something that is difficult for them to do, that runs counter to their temperament, runs counter to their sensibilities. So let's say you have a shy child, all right? Your child is shy, and you see them go over to the group just a little bit closer. That deserves some praise. Your bossy, older sib is slightly less sarcastic that night towards the younger siblings, and that's something that you should notice. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't say it in front of anybody else. Do a kind of drive-through, drive-by praise. Say it very quickly. Do something. Give them, one mother I knew threw a ring down on her daughter's bed the next day. Her daughter said, what's this for? She said, because yesterday, the way that you talked to your sister was just a little bit nicer, and it made my whole day go better. I loved it. And she walked out of the room. Don't get into a discussion. Don't be hyperbolic. None of this. You are the most beautiful. You are the best. That was the greatest thing I ever saw. It's like the story I told last year at the Y, and probably the year before, which there was a snowstorm. You can relate to it right now. And I went out there with our family, and there were thousands of kids sleigh riding, and they were all coming down this mountain. It was over on the west side in Riverside Park. So they're all coming down a mountain, coming down a hill. And it was a beautiful Currier and Ives scene, gorgeous, until I noticed I'm hearing these shouts coming out from all over this sleigh riding scene of, great job. That was the best sleigh riding I ever saw. And one of the kids, this older kid, he was about 7 or 8, came to his mother and said to her, what are you talking about? Great job. I was just responding to the laws of gravity. And at that moment, I knew. This was before the research, which started actually to come out from the 80s on. Too much praise doesn't do our children good. All right, now, the second to last thing, and I'm asking you to just hang in for a couple of more minutes, is how you create communication with your children. Communication helps you to stay in charge because it helps you to know. It helps you to discover what's going on with them. The longer I do this, the whiter my hair gets, the more I realize that I don't know what's going on in kids' minds. I don't know what's going on in your minds. Half the time, I don't know what's going on in my mind. We keep learning. That's one of the things that I think keeps all of us in this profession because it actually is so mysterious. We keep learning what we don't know. That's why we're so enthusiastic, because it keeps us glued, as in a way it will if you stay glued to the process of being a parent. So one of the things that we know is that we need to be able to do certain things to keep our children talking. I'm going to be doing a Parents League talk at the end of February. You can look it up on their site. just on communication. That's all we're getting into. But I want to help you today to go back for this week to be able to get something going. Number one, in doing this, children have learning styles, you know that. They have attention styles in a way, different ways of how much attention they can put into anything without getting distracted. They have temperaments, different temperaments. They also have what I call conversational styles. Some of your children open up in the morning, some at night. Some like a lot of back and forth questions. Harold speaks very quickly. His children may really like the fact that he speaks really quickly. Some children might not. Some of our children, they hear a tone in our voice and it shuts them down. You need to figure out when and how your child likes to be spoken to and likes to open up around. What kind of conditions, so to say, can you offer to them? And once you do, once you figure out when they open up, I'd like you to really try hard, and there are a few fathers here. I really want you to understand this as dads. I'd like you to figure out when those times are that they open up and build very brief talking rituals around them. And I want you to think very quickly, when was the last conversation you had with your child? Let's do this very quickly. What were you doing? Go back to the last conversation you had. What was it that you were doing? Anybody? Yes. Walking to school. Having breakfast. Great. There was a hand over there. Will you say it again? Driving. Basically, if we had more time, you'd all come up with other times that you had great conversations. You're going to notice something about them. The key component that's common between all of them is that you weren't looking at each other. You were not trying to have a conversation. Basically, conversation happens in the middle of doing other stuff. And the other stuff are the rituals around the house. The other stuff is the downtime around the house. When you're just sitting next to each other, all of a sudden your child will start to talk. Dinner time is another time. How many of you have dinner time? I don't mean with your whole family, but just with a majority of your family, more than 3 times a week? Raise your hands. Anyone here more than 4 times a week? Do you know the Joe Califano up at CASA, the clearinghouse for substance abuse up at Columbia, has said to me, as he's written everywhere, that the more dinner times you have, the later your child will become involved in drugs or sexually active. He says it's basically like a straight line. All of a sudden, I see everybody start to write this down very, very quickly, and usually I get a question about that. Is there anything specific I should cook for that night? Will that help? No. But in fact, dinner times are a time to have talking rituals as long as you don't grill the kids with questions. Just grill the food, not your kids. You want them to talk to you? Talk about your day. You try talking about your day at any moment during the day, and your kid is going to interrupt you. And not because they're nasty, not because they're mad, but because it reminds them of something that they did that day in school, after school, and it's going to make them open up to you. And when they talk to you, help them tell the story. We talk a lot about literacy. Our children need to become emotionally literate. And that means something that a lot of kids have trouble with, which hurts them in terms of being able to listen, to understand, to be able to mediate their own emotional life, to deal with it. And that's to tell a story from the beginning, the middle, to the end. And the ability to do that is really kind of simple. You just ask, what happened next? You respond to what your kid said with real feeling, not over-the-top feeling, but real feeling. You're kidding me. Susan said that to you? Where was she standing when she said that? Oh, she was standing right over there. Well, it can be, what was she wearing? And then you go back to, then what happened? Tell me what happened then. What did you say? What did she say? Show some life to it. And for God's sake, as everyone was saying in different ways, stop what else you're doing. Because those moments when those kids said undivided attention, when they are letting you into that vault, as they used to call it on Seinfeld, of their internal world, their lives, what happened, pay attention, listen. But don't just listen, respond. And with each of your children, it'll be a different kind of responding that they're going to need to feel from you. And why is it? It's because they need to feel some kind of authentic you around them. And I'm going to tell you this thing that really concerns me about what it is that we are creating in all of us. Listen carefully. And this is a little bit, it's related to what everybody said, but it's related to what Ned was saying earlier today. We all know and have heard of tough love. We've heard of unconditional love. We've heard of mother love, father love, how they're different, how they're the same. But the emphasis is not on love. And what I worry about is that we are developing something that I would call instrumental love, purposeful love. Love as a parent in which we try to do things in order to make something else happen. I'm going to show my child love now because their self-esteem needs to increase. I'm going to have a teachable moment and show my love that way. I'm going to help my child's brain to grow, to develop, because I know that connection is important. And I think what each of the people that spoke today was trying to say in one way or another is that we need to be able to just love our children, which is really there. Love them just for the purpose of that we love them. There's no hidden reason. There's no trying to enrich their development, even though it does enrich their development. It's not because we want to build their self-esteem, even though it does build their self-esteem. It's not because you want to create a connection, even though it does create a connection. It is simply because, as one child put it on this HBO special that I was consulting to, Mom, Dad, tell me you love me even more than you think I need to hear it. Mom, Dad, tell me you love me even more than you think I need to hear it. I don't know why. I don't know exactly what this child was saying. I wouldn't pretend to understand, except that I know that I can feel that what we're going to be moving towards is you're being able to use this information in some way to create a home filled with love, that basically are times that you just have a good time together. Whether they are rituals, whether they are ways that you enjoy each other, times that each of our speakers pointed to. And I want you to think for a moment. Close your eyes for just 1 second and think back to your own parents, to your own childhood. I want you to think of one thing that you thought was a loving, good moment. Just take a little 10 seconds. And now what I'd like you to do is if we can very quickly, before we say goodbye to each other today, and try to hold on, I know your kids need to be picked up, share with each other very quickly what are some rituals that you hold on to in your house that matter, that you think express love and that will make your children feel held. What matters? Quickly. Yeah. You sing while she's in bed before you go to sleep. You sing songs. What else do you do? A ritual that you have that actually, yes?
Spend their birthday with them out of school by themselves.
Oh, I'd like to be in your house. Spend out of school. All right. What I would like to say is go back home. Go back to your schools. Ask them to ask the people in your community, what do we do in our families? Just 2 more minutes. What do we do in our families that actually matters? And have them put it into a survey. Because I'll tell you what matters. The fact that you came here, the fact that you stayed this late, you listened to 5 different speakers, tell you all different things. This matters, and it matters that it's in this house. The 92nd Street Y has created a community. It is a town square. You should thank them for that because they have opened their doors for the last 25, 30, 100 years. Freda will tell you how long the Y has been open to create a community. Because we need to. We don't have a park bench anymore that my mother had with her friends. This is your neighborhood, your schools are your neighborhood, and your children need to feel held by a community around them. They need to feel something around them in which there are adults, not just other kids on Facebook, not just other kids trying to help and work with each other and be cruel to each other. They need to have a culture, a home, a town square around them. The reason I ask you to talk to each other is because that's exactly what we need to do. So go home. Take what it is that you've learned. Take some of the different perspectives and use them just in terms of what matches. My family had a shoe store. We grew up with a little shoe store. I watched my father and mother talk people out of shoes. I said, "What are you doing?" So they would say, "These shoes don't fit." And then my father would say, "I can't sell these shoes to you because they don't fit." Essentially, no matter what I've done, the many books, the thousands of consultations and talks, what I've done has been based in some way on trying to teach, to do no harm, to try to in some way give you things that now you have to decide. And I think I speak for every person who spoke here today. Now you have to decide, taken from this community, this town square, you have to decide what fits your child. You are the parent. You are the authoritative person in your house, and your kids need you and a home and a community around them to be held. I can't thank you enough for staying here for the whole night, for the whole day.